Hi, this is HONG Econ. So today we're going to talk about business cycles, circular flow and GDP, real GDP and nominal GDP, unemployment, cost, and inflation. So what's the business cycle? The business cycle is the short-run alternation between economic downturns, known as recessions, and economic upturns, known as expansions. So depression is a very deep and prolonged downturn. Recessions are periods of economic downturns when output and employment are falling. So expansions, or also called as recoveries, are periods of economic upturns when output and employment are rising. This is the US unemployment rate and the timing of business cycles from 1989 to 2009. So as you can see, when there is an economic downturn, the unemployment rate actually rises. So the economic downturns are followed by economic upturns, and it's also followed by economic downturns. So it's basically different from my BC grade where there's only downturns. So potentially, we can argue that high unemployment rate occurs when there is a slow economic development and low unemployment rate at a high economic development. One prominent indicator of economic development would be national accounts. They keep track of the spending of consumers, sales of producers, business investment spending, government purchases, and a variety of other flows of money among different sectors of the economy. So this is called a circular flow diagram, and it shows the flow of money, goods and services, and factors of production through the economy. The key principle is that the flow of money into each market or sector is equal to the flow of money coming out of the market or sector. So this is the expanded version of circular flow diagram. It looks complicated, but it's not. So by looking at this, we can determine the total flow of funds by adding all spending, consumer spending of goods and services, investment spending by firms, government purchase of goods and services, and exports, and then subtracting the value of imports. So this is the value of all final goods and services produced in the United States. That is the gross domestic product of the economy, known as GDP. So let's talk about GDP. So the GDP is the total value of all final goods and services produced in an economy during a given period. So there are three ways to calculate GDP. So first, survey firms and add up total value of their productions of final goods and services. Second, the sum of consumer spending, investment spending, government purchases of goods and services, and exports minus imports. And third, to sum the total factor income earned by households from firms in the economy. So why only final goods and services are included in GDP? Because counting the full value of each producer's sales would cause us to count the same items several times and inflate the calculation of GDP. So what's included in the GDP is the domestically produced final goods and services, including capital goods, new construction of structures, and changes to inventories. And what's not included are intermediate goods and services, inputs, used goods, and final assets such as stocks and bonds, and foreign produced goods and services. And now, what is the difference between real GDP and nominal GDP? As you can see in the table, the GDP increased from $1,000 billion to $1,500 billion from year 1 to year 2, which is 50% larger. Although the quantities of both apples and oranges increased, the prices of both apples and oranges also rose. So the part of the 50% increase in dollar value of GDP simply reflects higher prices, not higher production of output. Thus, in order to calculate the true increase in aggregate output produced, we need to find the value of output in year 2 expressed in year 1 prices. So in year 1, the price of apples was $1.25 each and the price of oranges was $1.5 each. So year 2 output at year 1 prices is the following: $1,150 billion. And output in year 1 at year 1 prices was $1,000 billion. So in this example, GDP measured in year 1 prices rose 15% from $1,000 billion to $1,150 billion. Basically, real GDP is the total value of all final goods and services produced in the economy during a given year, calculated using the prices of a selected base year. Nominal GDP is the same, except that it is calculated with the prices current in the year in which the output is produced. So what are some limitations of GDP as an indicator of one's economy? First, it excludes the non-market transactions. Also, it fails to account for or represent the degree of income inequality in society. Also, it does not indicate whether the nation's rate of growth is sustainable or not. It also does not account for the cost imposed on human health and the environment of negative externalities arising from the production or consumption of the nation's output. So from now, I want to talk about the key principles of unemployment. So first, employed people are currently holding a job in the economy either full-time or part-time. Second, unemployed people are actively looking for work but aren't currently employed. And third, the labor force is equal to the sum of the employed and the unemployed, basically the people who can work. So first, the labor force participation rate is the percentage of the population aged 16 or older than it is in the labor force. And fifth, the unemployment rate is the percentage of the total number of people in the labor force who are unemployed. So this is the basic formula of labor force participation rate, which is labor force divided by population age 16 and older multiplied by 100. Also, this is unemployment rate, which is number of unemployed workers divided by labor force and multiplied by 100. High unemployment rate means that people are not likely to find the jobs, and this leads to that unemployment rate is a good indicator of current labor market conditions. But is it perfect? Discouraged workers are non-working people who are capable of working but have given up looking for a job due to the state of the job market, so they're not counted as unemployed. So the discouraged workers are part of a larger group known as marginally attached workers, and these are the people who say they would like to have a job and have looked for work in the recent past but are not currently looking for work, and they're not also counted as unemployed. And the underemployed are people who work part-time because they cannot find full-time jobs, and they're not also counted as unemployed. Thus, these three groups undermine the unemployment's effectiveness in estimating the current labor market conditions. Now, there are the three big types of unemployment. Frictional unemployment is unemployment due to the time workers spend in job search. It is commonly caused by constant job creation and job destruction. Also, it is caused by the new workers always entering the labor market. Another one, structural unemployment, is unemployment that results when there are more people seeking jobs in a labor market than there are jobs available at the current wage rate. So when the government sets a minimum wage that exceeds the market equilibrium wage rate, the number of workers who like to work at the minimum wage is greater than the number of workers demanded at the wage rate. So this surplus of labor is considered structural unemployment. The natural rate of unemployment is the unemployment rate that arises from the effects of frictional plus structural unemployment. Now let's talk about inflation. Inflation is an increase in the general prices of goods and services in an economy, and deflation is the decrease. Both can be potentially bad for the economy depending on the reasons and the rate of price changes. So inflation rate is price level in year 2 minus price level in year 1 divided by price level in year 1 multiplied by 100. Economists think that high rates of inflation impose significant economic cost to the individuals and the economy. Top 3 are shoe leather cost, menu cost, and unit of account costs. Shoe leather costs are the increased cost of transaction caused by inflation. People hold money for convenience in making transactions. A high inflation rate, however, discourages people from holding money because the purchasing power of the cash in your wallet and the funds in your bank weakens as price level rises. So this makes people to reduce the amount of money they hold. Menu costs are the real cost of changing listed prices. So to change the price in a store may require a clerk to change the price listed. So when it comes to inflation, firms are forced to change prices more often, and this means higher costs for the economy as a whole. Unit of account costs arise from the way inflation makes money a less reliable unit of measurement. So this inflation is the process of bringing the inflation rate down. So you'll see how this inflation came out a high cost because much of the fall in inflation probably resulted from the very severe recession from 1981 to 1982, which drove the unemployment rate to 10.8%, which is the highest level since the Great Depression. So what are some measurement and calculation of inflation? A price index measures the cost of purchasing a given market basket in a given year. The index value is normalized so that it is equal to 100 in the selected base year. The price index in a given year is following: cost of market basket in a given year divided by cost of market basket in base year multiplied by 100. The Consumer Price Index, or CPI, measures the cost of the market basket of a typical urban American family. However, some economists believe that the Consumer Price Index overstates the actual rate of inflation. So let's compare 1985 with an after-tax income of $20,000 with 2010 with an after-tax income of $40,000. According to the CPI, prices in 2010 were about twice as high as in 1985, so those two families should have about the same standard of living. However, the 2010 family might have a higher standard of living for following reasons. First, the CPI measures the cost of buying a given market basket. Yet, consumers typically alter the mix of goods and services they buy, reducing purchases of more expensive products and increasing the purchases of cheaper products. For example, suppose that the price of chicken suddenly doubled. Koreans currently eat a lot of chickens, but in the face of such a price rise, many of them would switch to cheaper foods. A price index based on a market basket with a lot of chickens in it would overstate the true rise in the cost of living. The second reason arises from the innovation. In 1985, many of the goods we now take for granted, especially those using information technology, didn't exist, and there was no internet, there was no Google, and there were no iPhones. And by widening the range of consumer choice, innovation makes a given amount of money worth more. And many economists believe that the CPI somewhat overestimates the inflation. The other widely used price measure is the GDP deflator. The GDP deflator for a given year is equal to 100 times the ratio of nominal GDP for that year to real GDP for that year expressed in prices of a selected base year. So this was basically it for the Unit 2, and I hope you have a great day and see you next time. Bye. Purchasing power of the cash in your wallet and the funds in your bank. Cost and unit of account costs. Economy. And another one, structural